No, he rudely interrupted the sync clap. That's going to confuse him in editing.
Is it? Sorry.
Yeah, you did a double
You didn't
sync
say.
clap. Okay, you can do it. Let him do it. Let him do it. Let him do it. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to today's episode of Sam Torrency Unscripted. We have with us educationalist and all-round nice guy, Uncle
Umar Suleiman.
brother. Alongside Umar Suleiman, it's his good friend Usman Qureshi. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum. And I'm your host, Salman Butt, and co-host as well,
Umar Suleiman.
MashaAllah. Also a nice guy.
Thank you very much. I'll try and maintain that during this podcast. Yeah.
Just on the weekend.
Yeah.
We thought we'd have invite Usman Bhai on because number one, he's a very nice guy, mashallah, and number two, he ran a very interesting article recently, be published inshallah by the time this goes out. We'll put a link in the description, and he made reference to the results, A-level results coming out, and this time of year, and I think it's quite timely. So do you know anyone who got their results recently?
I know a few people who got the results recently, yeah. I
heard that young people are getting dumber. Is that true? Something like
Are you allowed to say that?
I don't know. We can edit it out if it doesn't meet compliance. But something like the lowest A-level results since the 1800s or something.
I think we can get the benefit of the doubt and say the exams are getting tougher.
Yeah.
Okay. You think so? Genuine?
To be honest, I don't know, but what I do know is that the corporate environment is constantly moaning about how graduates really don't have enough or have the right skills. They're not coming into industry with the right skills and knowledge. So that's something that keeps coming up again and again.
But isn't that partly due to the fact that industry is changing and what people require to be successful in the workplace has changed versus perhaps historically the way things were done? Or do you think genuinely it's people are coming off, the kids are coming out of the process line less educated?
Wasn't it always been less about education, more about creating an obedient workforce?
I really don't like using the word anyway. Educated, it means something much more. I think qualified is a good word.
Yeah.
No, I think, are they coming out better qualified? I think that, look, ultimately, children, students, they need to graduate with qualifications. And society needs to have a group of people coming out with qualifications. And so, with the grade boundaries in mathematics recently, for an A grade, from what I read in the papers, if I'm not wrong, being around 50-something%.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I might go back and do my A-levels.
I think that there are always going to be people who are gaining qualifications because the grade boundaries are not sticking to 80-90%, but they're sort of shifting all the time. So I don't think that you're going to find a time when people aren't going to come up with qualifications.
Have you noticed a difference though? From you used to be a head teacher, right? What year was this?
2005 to 2008.
Yeah. So I mean, you're still involved with education, your community,
broadly.
And that kind of stuff, young people. What kind of changes have you seen over the years of in our young people?
What changes have I seen? I think that
it seems to me, I'm not that old. I'm not as experienced. Sorry, not old. As experienced as you.
Yeah.
And wise.
But, I mean, just anecdotally, what I've seen.
Yeah.
I mean, kids just look like zombies now. I mean, if they're not kind of addicted to Fortnite, no offense, Imraj.
Yeah. Or they're carrying knives into chicken shops.
Yeah, but they're not doing that anymore.
No, they leave
because
them
the
outside.
boxes.
Yeah, that's right.
Nice, timely messages in the boxes. Yeah.
It's about time.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, it seems like they're just kind of.
Yeah, it's difficult to talk about this because obviously when you say anecdotally, I can only talk about my specific area, Southwest London.
Rap.
Yes. Big up Southwest London.
Thank you very much.
Big up indeed.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I really can't talk about it in terms of qualifications and A-levels as much because I'm no longer in the schooling environment. But I think that certainly one thing, and I spoke about this in the article, one thing that certainly has raised a lot of concerns for me is that I find that young people now again, in my limited experience, I find that their lives seem to be consumed all the time with a way of existing, a way of living that's really just more about them. Okay, so I think when I think back at the time when I was younger, there would always seem to be a generation of young people who were motivated by their faith. You would find engaging with learning about Islam,
Yep.
or becoming part of Islamic projects, trying to come to the masjid more regularly, help out, those sort of things. I find that decreasing as time goes on. Additionally, I feel, and this is one of those sort of when I was a lad sort of thing, but to be honest, I feel it. I feel that the level of respect, the level of adab or manners in society has decreased enormously. I remember when we were younger, or probably remember when we were younger, our parents used to say, beta salam karo, son, daughter, give salam to your elders. And it's like we said, we were never going to do that to our children. But actually, I think we have.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? Because it's an adab, or it's a manners aesthetic that one generation passes on to the other. And I think that now with our generation, I feel this, we sort of turned our back on our culture for reasons, maybe for the right reasons, maybe for the wrong reasons, but we said we were going to bring Islam into this now.
Yeah.
But even if the parents know the hadith, يُسَلِّمُ الصَّغِيرُ عَلَى الْكَبِيرِ, the youngster gives salam to the elder, that's not being practiced.
Right. It's funny, actually, an interesting point, Usman, is went to see a brother from South London. His mother passed away recently. Allah Azza wa Jal give her Jannah. And he said that a lot of brothers contacted him, brothers he hadn't spoken to in 20, 25 years. He goes from, and he was involved in a masjid that has a lot of people from the revert community, or convert, I'm not too fussed about using whichever word. But he said that hardly any of them contacted him. But all of the people, even if they had differences of manhaj and approach and stuff, they all made an effort to contact him, and it really made a difference to him. And he goes, he didn't find that from anyone, even if they've been practicing for a long time, that they tried to reach out to him. And it made a difference to him, the guys who did. And this thing about creating that culture of Islam, as well as just the rules, I think is quite important. And I think definitely we've missed out on that. Generally in society, we've missed out on creating an Islamic environment. We may know what an Islamic way of doing things are, but we haven't created that environment where it's actually happening, I think. And I think this goes towards what you're saying as well.
I think it's part of that intergenerational transfer of knowledge, skills, and adab. Because I remember my parents, anytime there was a bereavement, you'd make an effort, you go out your way, you stop what you're doing, or take a day off work or whatever. There's something those things you just absorb when you're younger, right? So you're saying then the fault is ours for not transferring that onto the next generation?
Yeah, who else? Whose fault can it be? I mean, I don't think that you can blame the children. Children are nurtured, they grow, they're cultivated in an environment that their parents expose them to, or society. So I think that there's a lot for us to think about, certainly. Even if we're not comfortable at the moment with taking the blame, which I think is inevitable, I think there's a lot of cause for introspection, for thinking about what has our generation done, okay? Because I'm the child of first-generation migrants. And my parents, in good faith, they came here as economic migrants, and my father did anyway, his family. And, they wanted us to excel. They wanted us to do well. Yeah. And that became the sort of the prime motivation, okay? And that sort of trickles down into the consciousness, okay? Where we talk about ourselves as being Muslim, and it's we attend study circles, or we'll go to conferences and we'll say, yes, the most important thing is being a good Muslim. But what does that mean? Every single day when you're thinking about the decisions that you make for yourself, for your family, for your children, how much of those decisions being guided with a view to serving God and being an obedient servant of God? And how much of it is actually, if we're honest, everyone has to look inside their soul and ask the question, is it really guided with trying to maximize what you can here in the dunya. Okay, it's like I have, where I am, 11 plus is a big thing. I remember a brother calling me up and he said,
11 plus what?
Oh, 11. Well, I'm not talking about sizes. So
the test you have to do to get into grammar school.
To grammar schools, exactly. And I remember a brother calling me up and he said, Akhi, my son got into whatever grammar school. And I said, mashallah. But, it sort of astounded me that the relief that I heard in his voice was almost the same as if someone had said, my son's been guaranteed the Jannah. It sounded almost as that type of relief. I mean, mashallah, I was very pleased and happy, and I know that the brother, struggled and, to get his son in. But I think that a lot of our focus, every person has to sort of account themselves. But a lot of that focus ends up being towards academia.
How is this affecting the kids then? Because if the kids are kind of absorbing this messaging from their parents that they're putting so much attention into their, education or their future career, this must have an impact on the young people then. Right?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, just that messaging on its own, obviously the messaging is very wide. What I find often, and I think what's really important for parents to understand, is how their relationships are with their children, okay? Because I get the same things. I work in the community, I get lots because I've been a teacher. So a lot of adults or parents approach me and talk to me about the problems that they're having with their children, okay? And, when you start to dig down, you realize that the relationship which starts off when children are young, when they're young and primary school, innocent, they don't have any pressures of examinations or whatever, parents tend to have a different type of closeness to them. But after they start going to secondary school, the pressure for them to succeed, whatever that means, okay, means that actually from a relationship that seemed to the child to be unconditional starts to change, starts to morph into something where, well, why didn't you get the top marks? Why didn't you do this? Everything becomes about tuition and, pushing them. You won't see them after a while in community gatherings because they've got tuition, they've got to do this, they've got to do that. And actually the relationship with the parent and the child just becomes about that. Not completely, but that starts to feature. Right, and so if the child is not good enough, the parent seems to be unhappy. And I've seen personally, I've witnessed relationships breaking because the child just wants to be accepted and loved. There's a chap called Sir Giovanni who writes about this in a book called his Theory of Schooling, and he talks about how when those relationships break down between parents and their children start to seek that love, that unconditional love that they should have from their parents, from other people. And some of those people, it's a little bit more nefarious. Could be gangs, could be others. And then the parents saying, well, what happened? Well...
But and then 18 years later, they come to the mosque or whoever and says, can you fix my kid?
Can you fix the problem? Yeah,
yeah, but I agree with you, Usman, with what you're saying. But I think also, haven't we gone too far the other way? Where now you can't criticize children, you can't push them. Islam has a strong history of academic excellence. If you look at the scholars and the way they studied and what they'd memorized, these would be students, excellent students, wouldn't you say, by today's standard?
Yeah, I mean, it's the problem with having a conversation like this. It's so multifactorial to really discuss that. That it probably we couldn't do justice here. But as a teacher, my experience, and hopefully a lot of teachers would agree with me in saying that the most important thing is the relationship. That's primary, okay? Because actually, if you've got children who you've got a good relationship with, they're more ready to listen to you, okay? But in schooling at the moment, certainly at the moment, and it has been for a long time, it's always just about targets. It's hitting those targets. I mean, schooling is a corporate culture. Okay. It's certainly independent schooling is, okay, but schooling in general. And so, either children are going to cut it or they're not going to cut it. They're going to make the grade or they're not going to make the grade. Okay. Everything just becomes about targets and about results. So the whole idea of building relationships with those children stops. Okay, because we don't have the time. We've got syllabuses to cover and all of that sort of thing. So,
do you mean relationship between the teacher and the pupils?
Between the teacher and the pupil, definitely. Okay, so it's not about Muslims shouldn't seek academic excellence. They must.
Yeah.
You know, but are we actually preventing our children from realizing that because of the way that we're nurturing them?
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah.
And I mean, I would maybe question the idea that, you know, an intelligent, studious Muslim from our tradition or whatever would do well at school today, because arguably school isn't necessarily about creating an environment for actual thinkers, but it's more, I think, a relic to serve the Industrial Revolution, the public schooling. I mean, the compulsory schooling system.
But right now, that's the measure that we have, because we don't have the schooling system that brings out thinkers as it is.
Maybe I mean there must be.
So the measure is academic results, isn't it?
No, but
right
we allow that.
Yeah.
We allow that to be the measure.
Yeah.
Okay, as Muslims, our primary measure should be, you know, has my child inculcated the virtues that I want him or her to have as a Muslim?
Yeah.
That should be our primary yardstick. Okay. How respectful are they to people in society? Are they willing to do something simple, like if they see, you know, something that I see very commonly in the masjid, if a child is sitting down and a person who's much older than him comes along, the child will just sort of sit there with his legs wide open and just do like that, not even looking at the person in the face. I mean, that's, for me, okay, great, child's in the masjid, that's good. But that's no good. Right, these sort of things are really, really
by
important.
example, then, isn't it, Usman?
Yes,
I should teach by example. I'm sorry I don't do it to you when you come in.
I'll do it next time I come in.
Oh God,
My leg was tired that day.
Yeah, like those times. No, you're right. Always
You
by
gave another example of like just helping out, picking out rugs or whatever. I remember
Yes.
you were talking in one of your articles.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's the spirit of giving, okay, doesn't seem to be there. And again, it's just my limited experience, okay, where young people are ready to say, no, look, we'll help, okay, in a way that we were brought up to do. And I know this really sounds like, oh, you're just moaning about young
Grumpy
people.
old man.
Grumpy old man. Yeah, I know, and I do hear that sometimes. And I'm conscious a lot. Yeah, I'm conscious that shouldn't be the case. Okay,
But you know what it is, Usman, right? I also genuinely believe that there's a lack of barakah in our time. In the time that we live, there's less barakah than our parents' generation had. Now, you often find that the father and the mother are both working. Okay, so they're trying to provide for the family. Their time they don't have in the same way. It has a different strain on the family. If I look back at our parents' generation, generally it'd just be the father that's working, the mother's at home. They wouldn't even do excessively long hours. They would still be some semblance of a family. Families would come and see each other. You'd see your elder cousins. You would do things together. They would still go to the masjid. And I know it can reflect itself in a kind of
It takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah, absolutely. It may seem as if it's kind of a me-centric time that we live in, but it's just living life now, just trying to get through it. That, you know, that they have less disposable time to do the things that they want.
I agree with you, Umar, that there are some people definitely, and I know them, yeah. I know people who, forget husband and wife working, if they can get the child working to meet ends meet, they probably would, and they would need to. Okay, some people really struggle at that, I know that. But at the same time, I know a lot of people who don't struggle, who opt, okay, to have a lifestyle. They make a lifestyle choice, okay. So I would agree with you, and at the same time I wouldn't, okay? And my question is, the lifestyle choices that we're making oftentimes, and I forgive my usage of this word, okay, middle-class Muslims, okay? But, you know, is the mother working because somehow this is going to develop a better human being in the way that Allah and His Messenger intended? Or is it so actually we can have the perks of the Joneses? Okay, and I mean, everyone is free to do what they want. Sorry, social mobility,
desire to reach up to some kind of ever unreachable kind of standard.
One of the problems that I would say is that actually now in this time, you're talking about criticisms. It's very difficult to criticize an approach in life like that, where people say, "Well, it's none of your business." I'm not saying it is my business. Do what you want. You know, you're free to do what you want, but is that very, very insular view and almost secular view, not respecting the fact that you're part of the Muslim society, and how do our actions individually impact the collective?
Yep.
That's the bit that I'm worried
So
about.
it is your business.
If they
business.
understood it,
Yeah.
it's everyone's business ultimately. You know, we're Islam didn't come in a very secular way that okay, I manage my small herd, and it really doesn't matter if it impacts the rest negatively. That's not my concern. It is your concern. You know, none of you truly believe until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. I would love that my children are upright. I would love that my children are well behaved, well mannered, that they are succeeding, and I would love the same for my brothers and sisters. Okay, but it's our actions betray us.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a feature of just general, I think, colonial modernity as well, and that is the atomization of society. That everyone's, instead of, whereas before, maybe 100, 200 years ago, the majority of the Muslim world would be organized in kind of units, family units of not wife, husband and 2.5 kids, but 50, 100 people, you know, extended families, and that is what that's what's been kind of broken up into putting every family. The nuclear family was invented, you know, everyone in their silos, and that, looking at that and trying to address that, I think will solve so many issues. So from in terms of Tarbiyyah of young people, in terms of the oppression that a lot of sisters, for example, face, right, and that many are turning towards kind of feminist discourses, white Western liberal feminist discourses to address
Many
those issues.
women will argue that they face a lot of oppression in those type of setups.
Yeah, that's
They can do.
one argument.
They can do. They can do.
Living with the
But
mother-in-law and that kind of stuff.
But you see, this is a problem, and I feel that this happens all the time. Definitely, there's no doubt that women have been oppressed, and that needs to be resolved, and women have a right to talk about that. It's their right, it's not our right in some ways. But it's always, what you see in the Muslim community is a flitting from one extreme to the other. Okay? In almost anything that we do, this path of moderation, or the central path, is rarely ever tread. Okay? Men are oppressing, let's go to the other end. Okay? Our children are not performing, BME children are not performing or whatever, it's all about performance. Okay, everything seems to move to an extreme.
Yeah.
And that's why we find society being cyclical in its nature. Because when you move from one extreme to another, you find, okay, it's not working for us, let's go back the other way. Oh, that's
Like
not working.
pendulum.
It just keeps going.
Yeah.
You know, find that path. And actually the argument that hopefully we're all proposing today, or certainly I am, is that if we focused on what Allah and His Messenger said, not in that rather airy-fairy way, okay, but really looking at the values that Islam has, to have confidence that actually if I prioritize those values as exemplified by our Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that we're going to find that we get that and more.
Agreed.
Because we're building people of character. You see, we've accepted in some ways that Islam, you know, has no narrative in this country. It must do, because we have something that we want to give. Yeah. Islam came to make the lives of people, society better. And if we don't believe in that in ourselves, then we're going to fall victim to the same sort of mentality that Salman was talking about earlier.
So how do you practically address that then? What's your vision? What's your narrative?
If I was to say that here, I think people get really worried. But the narrative, you see, I think, look, ultimately...
Are you talking like, you know, after school supplementary Tarbiyyah, or
That you can charge a good price for.
that you can charge a good price for.
Or disrupt the whole system, educational system, or what are you suggesting?
I mean, there's a lot. I'm afraid. People ask me about, you know, should I send my child to a Muslim school or a state school or this school or that? I get asked that all the time. And I said, look, it really just depends on what your focus is. You know, I have a real concern. I worked in state schools in Croydon and the surrounding area. I'm worried. I choose to homeschool my children specifically for the reason that I feel that youth culture is too strong and it's too dominant. I mean, I think, because I've been a teacher, I've worked with youth before, I believe that I have enough savviness relative to most people to be able to know what's going on. But even then I feel powerless. I feel powerless in front of youth culture. I feel powerless from a culture that basically, if my child is inducted in that culture, that I could potentially lose him or her, and I wouldn't be able to do much about it. You know, it's a fear. You know, it's like Russian roulette. It might be okay. It may not. I'm not ready to take that risk. I don't want to.
What about British roulette? Is any better?
Was there a British roulette? I didn't even know that. Yeah, that's the wrong one.
So still haven't got the hang of this.
Anti-Russian at the moment, aren't
You
we?
should put labels on this, man.
We're anti-Russian at the moment. That's had to drop that one in.
Oh, I see. Right. That makes sense. Yeah, my basically what I'm saying is that I feel pretty powerless, you know, to really ensure that my children are protected. Okay, and so for me at the moment, and I'm not saying this is the way for everyone. Homeschooling is important, but what I'll say is this: if you prioritize the way that your children are being brought up over what you consider to be more important, which I don't agree with, which is their education, okay, or qualification rather, right? I think that that's of significantly more importance, okay? And ultimately, like for example, I have my children in my house, and I know it's a limited example, and there is a benefit that I was a teacher, okay? However, my children, albeit that they are a little bit distant from popular culture or what's going on the street, which I think is a blessing actually, right?
Sure, just like their dad.
Just like their dad, yeah. Don't expose me, Umar. But I think that for me that would be a priority, and I think that's what parents are not prioritizing, yeah, ultimately. The other thing that I think is really important that parents don't do enough is that they're not really inducting their children in how to live in a household or in community, okay? I don't know. I mean, it may sound like a trivial point, okay, but it actually reflects what's happening in households when children come and they don't know, they've never done a part-time job, you know, by the time they get to 15, 16. They don't know how to iron their own shirts. They've never cooked their own lunch. They literally have their mothers waiting on them, okay?
Or wives.
Or, not at 16, bro. Come on, you know? I think that's a bit ambitious. Yeah. But I think it's because it's all geared towards, I don't want my child to be distracted from the main goal, and that is that they need to study. Okay, yeah. So my concern is by the time you get to that point, skills. They don't have any life skills. By the time they get to that point, if they didn't make it in study, neither did they get the study, nor did they get the skills, nor did they get the adab. And what are you left with?
On the whole, though,
giant child.
Giant. Well, that's exactly what you're left with now. Giant children.
Usman, the way you've painted the picture, it seems as if like all the kids are mad studying and really want to, well, their parents want them to do well, but the results don't necessarily reflect that. As in, what's the issue?
Maybe they're pushing them so much.
Do you think generally that, and we got to bear in mind where we live in South London, it's probably middle class generally. Yeah, you know, mashallah, right? You know, well to do in that sense, better than places like Slough and all of that, right? So they're gonna
even though you call it South London.
Yeah, South London.
We stopped doing that, by the way.
Yeah. Is it that everyone's pushing their children that much?
Look, you know, in these conversations, you're going to generalize, aren't you? You know, you can't speak about every single parent, and I'm not saying that every single parent is doing that, but you know, look, I think I wrote in the Muslim community. I wrote in the article about Newham. Okay, Newham has children from very disadvantaged backgrounds who are doing exceedingly well. MashaAllah, that's really, really good. But you know, there is a generation of parents who are just focused on this task because it's expensive to live in London. What do people talk about day to day? It's really expensive. How many friends do we have who have moved out of London because they can't, you know, they can't earn enough? And so the priority that's switched on a lot of the time is we need our children to do well, and they should. That's always a given, okay? Yep. But what are you giving up? That's the question I'm asking. I'm not saying that people shouldn't do that. They should, you know, and I'm eager for my own children and other children to do well. But what are you giving up at the end of that?
I think one reason that maybe some kids aren't doing that well is because a lot of parents, I think, are still pushing their kids to do subjects that don't suit them and don't interest them or don't suit their personality type.
Like PhDs in photosynthesis.
Generally, like, I mean, there's so many.
It is something so obscure.
So many handsome devils. So many parents still want to push their kids to do medicine or.
You reckon our generation as well?
Or something.
You
I mean,
find
I was speaking the other day to some kids who didn't kind of do that well, and their parents were like, you know, can you speak to our kids? And I felt sorry for them because they kind of been pushed into themselves thinking they want to do medicine, for example.
Are their parents freshies? I don't mean that in a bad way. Are their parents freshies?
But I mean, some of them. But they don't know
Umar,
what they want to themselves.
You know, when you say they're freshies, okay, look, if you have the financial security and the stability to be able to protect your child as he or she is growing up, then actually you're going to have that middle class luxury of being able to be open-minded in the way that you're saying, okay? And that's a problem sometimes because we live in, you know, echo chambers and we're talking to the same people with the same ideas. We say that's a really great idea, that's very, you know, hip and liberal and whatever, but that doesn't mean that it's spread all across, you know, the Muslim community. And a lot of people don't have those financial securities. Okay, and so what they want for their children is financial security, and it's a good thing. You should have financial security.
I'm saying it's for wanting necessarily doctors and that. So I haven't heard it as much in our generation. That's what I'm saying. People have been brought up here that they necessarily want them to go down that route of being doctors.
It's not about being a doctor. It's about what are the most financially secure roles that you have now or opportunities.
I agree.
So it's nothing to do with, you know, in the way that you're saying, oh, I want my son to be a doctor. You know,
no, that's what Salman was saying, isn't it?
I think all this changes the accent in which you say it. Everything else is the same.
I want to be a doctor.
That was better, actually.
Of photosynthesis.
They're doctors, though.
Real doctors.
Real doctors, not the butchers. Not the butchers.
No, it's true. But it's like you said, Usman. I think it's that balance, isn't it, between all of this and
the sad thing is, that those careers or those subjects that are perceived to be financially secure, they all, I mean, most of them that I can think of, they tend to be less influential but just rule following jobs.
Yes.
You know? Doctor, accountant, engineer.
You say that. My brother's going to have a heart attack listening to this later.
You know what? Actually, one brother.
What about sociologist or journalist or economist?
Remember the BT advert?
You know, which advert was that?
And you remember the Maureen Lipman BT advert where she puts the little log on the cake and she goes, he got his results, and the person goes, "Is in sociology," and she puts it back on. She goes, "At least it's synology."
I remember that actually.
Yeah, I remember that. But it's not. It's not. It's not.
Usman's favourite.
It's not as valued amongst.
What is value? Value is just about what can give you the best financial return.
But it's not that I've met people who have good jobs and they've got no izzat, right? It's true though, isn't it? But if people seek their honour, and the statement of Umar Khattab radiallahu anhu comes to mind, isn't it? When people seek their honour through these things, then they're going to be devoid of real honour. And then you find some people, subhanAllah, maybe they have a menial job by the dunya standards, but wallahi they're people of honour and they're people of integrity, and that Allah has bestowed that respect and love in the hearts of people for them. If we're chasing that through that, then I think we're going to end up to fail. And precisely those things that you're saying about in our children, if we inculcate about good manners, you know what, whether a child looks good or not, whether they're pretty or whether they're really good at football, none of that makes a difference to the average person. But if a child is polite, wallahi, you have a time for them. I found if a child is polite, you like that child, subhanallah. And this is the hadith of the Prophet, the best thing you can teach your children is good manners.
Yeah,
I mean, manners doesn't keep the lights on.
Doesn't keep the lights on. I think, look, the conversation moved towards financial security. It's not about Muslim children excelling. That's a must in everything that they do, be it their studies, be it profession, or whatever. Mediocrity cannot be a word in the Muslim vocabulary, the Islamic vocabulary, right? So we have to do that. We have to, and we want our children to be financially secure. Why not? You know, the Prophet ﷺ, you know, gave the advice to people that don't give away too much charity, leave your own children begging. You know, so financial security is important as well. However, the discussion is not really about that. My concern, and when I wrote the article, is my concern with the lack of young Muslims. Because look, We're a community. For that community to thrive and to perpetuate, okay, it needs people to take over the reins.
Yeah.
Okay. My concern is that I feel that there is a generation that is absent,
Agreed.
that is no longer there to take up the reins. Okay, it's not to say that they will never be there, it's possible. But the sunnah, or what we've seen all through our lives so far, is that that generation was there seeking knowledge, attending courses, and maybe the nature in which knowledge is sought because of the internet, because of YouTube, because of Numan Ali Khan videos, or Umar Sulaiman, or whoever it is. Yeah, O-M-A-R.
It's spelled U-M-E-L. It's spelled U-M-E-L-O-S-M-A-N.
Maybe that has become, you know, a different way of seeking knowledge. That's possible, okay? But all the time what's happening is that there is a lack of nurturing or cultivation that is not taking place, that isn't taking place within the community. Okay,
and you're saying that's because parents are disproportionately focusing on their academic achievements and to secure a better financial future, material future.
That's what I'm surmising.
I think as well as the academics, I've also found a lot more now where parents are sending their kids for things like flute lessons and honestly, like, you know, playing the piano and all of this sort of stuff. Yeah, exactly. Or playing the triangle. I've seen they want their children to be holistically developed, but not Islamically. So now you find parents talking about making the children more holistically developed, but not in an Islamic way. So they'll send them for, I don't know, horse riding and flute lessons or playing the piano and this sort of other bourgeois.
It's hot air.
Exactly. But I want to say something that I've noticed in the city, actually. When I started my career, maybe almost 15 years ago now, subhanAllah, there's a lot more people coming through who had just kind of finished from university. They were active in their Islamic societies and they'd get plugged in and they were kind of more involved. I found that's very quickly gone downhill. There's very few people who get involved, at least with the same intentions as perhaps that generation, the kind of myself and above myself, who came from those more active Islamic societies. Now, Islamic networks within organizations are all about diversity and inclusiveness and all of these type of initiatives.
Networking.
Yeah, networking completely. And what can I do for my career? And then I hear less of a buzz from Islamic societies within universities as well. And I know they've got a lot of speakers.
There's going to be a lot of, there's been a lot of pressure on Islamic societies, a chilling of free speech and them doing Islamic
work,
events and talks and stuff.
I've certainly seen a lot less people coming out who are active from universities. Yeah, fewer. You know, but that's because they've invited people who are hate preachers. Yeah. So they've impacted all the other universities.
Is that legally true anymore?
Yeah, so there is that missing generation. Is it the universities that aren't producing?
You see, that's why it's difficult to have these conversations. We can only generalize. You know, I can only say what I think, you know, is a reflection of the behaviors of young people around me.
Maybe university isn't the way to go. Remember you were saying something about, you know, what advice would you give to students who have got their results? Maybe they didn't get as good as they expected, or maybe they're looking, should I apply to universities? What should I do? You know, is university for everyone?
I mean, to be honest, if you're asking me about universities, I think that it really depends on the type of subject that you want to take. I think it's very difficult to, for example, if you want to study medicine, to do it in any other way than to go to university. However, now,
Nigeria.
Sorry?
Or Nigeria.
Or Nigeria, okay. There's Croatia, somewhere like that.
Czechoslovakia.
If you want to study, go to those places.
Right. But I think that now, look...
Actually, I meant Pakistan as well, in case our Nigerian brothers and sisters are going to get offended by that. I can use certificates for Pakistan as well.
I think that it's 30, 35, 40,000 pounds worth of debt after 3 years. Okay,
Sharia compliant debt.
Sharia compliant debt.
Whether it's Sharia compliant or not, 40,000, 35, 40,000. It's too much, and now actually what we're finding, I'm sure everyone's had similar experiences, is that lots of graduates are saying, well, you know, I've been a year out of university, I can't get a job. Okay, I've been a year and a half out of university, I can't find. and they end up gravitating towards employment that they never considered that they would take, because actually they don't want to be out of work. They feel that there's a stigma attached to that, which is possibly true. So I would actually suggest that people consider apprenticeships as a very good option, an opportunity for getting into the workplace, because you're actually earning from the word go. So if you start as an apprentice, even from 16, you're going to be earning money, you're going to be getting on-the-job training, okay? And at the end of the 2-year or 3-year apprenticeship, depending on which company, depending on which profession or, you know, side that you want to go into, you're going to be much better placed at the end of it to take a job after the apprenticeship, because actually you've got skills. You've got skills and you've got knowledge. So a company is going to turn around and say, well, I've got a graduate who I'm going to have to spend at least a year, if not more, training up, because they don't know anything. I think we'll all agree, those of us who have completed degrees, we were really useless for the workplace. We had some theoretical knowledge, but we didn't know what to do. And so companies have to invest. They don't have to invest it with the apprenticeship, because actually the government was paying most, you know, of that wage. They got to train them in the way that they wanted. They're already fed up with graduates who they don't think cut the mustard. And so it's a win-win situation. And I think that, be it paralegal or legal, so legal profession through paralegal, accountancy, you know, through the same apprenticeship, or in IT, anything really. Lots and lots of fields are open now for young Muslims to consider apprenticeships. But, you know, one of the big issues is, and I think that the Muslim community has to really get to grips with this, is the idea of looking down on someone who doesn't have a degree. I think this is a real big issue in the Muslim community, and it's poisonous, actually.
Are you talking about those who are selling the bilgissu?
Wo bichare, I'm not talking about those. No, they're good people there.
Mashallah.
But I think that...
You're right. I mean, it's just like I think a lot of people, it's just a badge of honor, even though they might get into debt and might not get a job at the end of it, but they'll just feel...
It's a badge of honor. They believe that actually it represents intelligence. Okay, because we measure intelligence in that very silly way, that very crude way of saying, I've got a degree, ergo, therefore I am intelligent. Okay, not necessarily. Are you saying that anyone who didn't do a degree wasn't intelligent? Would anyone say that Richard Branson isn't intelligent? Would anyone say that Alan Sugar, whether he is...
Well...
It's not very sweet.
I mean, the point is clear.
How can someone go about learning what, you know, how to get an apprenticeship or that kind of stuff? Where can they go for that kind of information?
There's a website from memory, because we had a talk yesterday. I think the brother mentioned it was apprenticeship.gov.uk. I think it is. Yeah. It's quite informative. I did visit it.
Is it quite competitive, or compared to university? I mean, the thing with university is you probably always...
What I heard yesterday from the brothers was that companies are investing a lot more in their apprenticeship schemes than they are even in their graduate programs now, because they see that actually this is a much better business decision for them to make, to take apprentices from that age. I remember Ernst & Young made a declaration maybe a year ago that really degrees don't really matter as much for them anymore, probably in a bid to do this, you know. I mean, if I were in their position, I'd do the same thing.
What would you do in your company? What would you prefer?
I actually think apprenticeships. I mean, they still take obviously graduates, etc. I think apprenticeships definitely is the way forward. I'd recommend young people, instead of getting to that much debt. And I found that in the workplace, people prefer if you've got professional qualification versus a university degree. So it doesn't hold the same weight ahead.
But I think additionally, some of the brothers were saying that if you wanted to take a degree, the company will pay for it. Okay, so
once you get your kind of get your foot in the door.
So you're working part-time and you're getting your degree part-time.
I think maybe it's more for you to convince the parents rather than the students, prospective university students, that because parents would think, no, you have to go to university. That's the logical next step.
Yeah,
kind of force their kids into.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think there are lots of issues tied in. For example, I mean, I know from the Pakistani community, which that's my heritage, that if you don't have a degree, marriage becomes very difficult. You know, things like that. So it's a mark of respect. It's a badge of honor. It's a way of convincing the world that you are someone. Okay. But I think that, you know, it's about time that the Muslim became a little bit more sensible and rejected the idea that a person who goes to university, it's not that they're any less, of course, you know, mashallah, they've been through the degree, they worked hard.
Chilled out for 3 years.
Chilled out for 3 years, okay. There's hard work entailed, and I'm not trivializing the degree, but it just doesn't make financial sense anymore to do that. There's no guaranteed job at the end of it. I mean,
so even if your aim is a material kind of comfort one, then it still doesn't make sense to push kids into university.
And I think it comes back to the original point, Usman, you're making at the beginning of this podcast about what are we bringing up our children with, you know? And I think to have them to be productive members of society is something that we should try and aim for. We don't, though, you know, in the same way. We just want them to have a good job for themselves and for their family.
You mentioned in your article that you did a brief survey with kids.
Yeah, I'm always interested. I'm hoping to do something a little bit wider as well across Southwest London. I hope I get the chance to do that. But I asked a number of questions because I'm really interested in understanding how Muslim families are connecting with their faith and teaching it to their children, and how much time they spend with the Quran, for example, and other things. I asked a number of questions. It's quite enlightening, not surprising. But one of the question.
Your questions.
Sorry?
Your questions were enlightening.
The answers were enlightening, bro. Yeah. Maybe the questions as well.
Yeah.
But one of the questions that I asked was to the student, what would make your parents really proud of you? What's the one thing that you think would make your parents really proud? One of the students wrote down, so 25 kids, 25 responses, and one of them said that my parents would be very happy if I made hifz the Quran. Yeah. And another child said that, the same thing, and that I become an active member working for the Muslim community. But all of the other respondents, unsurprisingly, said pretty much the same thing, either some form of academic success or success in terms of career or something of that nature. Okay? So it comes back down to the same thing. And when you ask me, okay, you know, why is that my perception? Because ultimately what you're putting in the mind of your child is the idea that material success, you know, is actually something that you should be driven for, or you should be and Islam seems to just become some sort of adjunct. Okay, it's something that's sort of added on or bolted on when you get the time. I went to a youth camp program recently, and I had some young people sitting around me reading the Quran, and you know, I can understand Quran being read in that way when we were children, when we had, you know, the generosity of aunties in the community who gave up their time to teach lots and lots of children. May Allah bless them, you know. And they were from the subcontinent background and their skills were limited, but despite that, they did a lot, you know.
Definitely.
So if our Quran was problematic from that time, there could have been a reason, but now...
You mean the ability to recite?
The ability to recite, with, you know, at least makharij, at least that your letters, the pronunciation, and that you're able to read with a certain degree of fluency should be there. For us, it may not have been. But now with access to lots of teachers, even over the internet, I know lots of people are joining on through Skype with teachers in Egypt or other parts of the world. There should be less excuse for that. But when you talk to the kids, and a group of them, I started asking questions about where do you go, where do you learn Quran? A number of them sort of said, well, you know, I don't, you know, how often do you read the Quran? Well, I don't, you know.
This was already a selected kind of sample. This was a youth camp.
No, this was, it was just on the spot. That thing was on the spot.
It was a youth camp.
It was a youth camp,
so it's already a group of people that are perhaps more
engaged.
Yeah. Generally speaking, it's a practicing community of people sent their children, you know, or what we may term, without defining it, a practicing community. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that was worrying, you know, and it sort of reinforces in my mind, and the questionnaire, as I said, was quite revealing, some of the answers about the amount of whether the parents go to the masjid to pray, whether they recite the Quran, that was one of the questions. Do your parents recite the Quran at home in front of you at any time? There wasn't much positive response to that, for example. Okay, so it just keeps reinforcing the idea, okay, that I have in my mind, that I'm seeing more and more of, right? That there is a tremendous focus on qualifications, on schooling, on that sort of achievement. Okay, even for example in our masjid, when we hold programs, we had an apprenticeship program yesterday, good attendance.
Yeah,
okay. I feel that if we had a program on how to develop your closeness with God, the audience would have been probably not as many people as there were there, and that's happened before in the past as well. Okay, so I mean, we're not sitting here in judgment or criticism in that way, but I think just as a community, we have to think about what is guiding us and what is motivating us, what is propelling us forward, how are we considering the tarbiyyah, the cultivation, the nurturing of our children, and what's important, because at the end of it, okay, we're going to find that the Muslim community finds itself without a generation to pass, the reins onto. That's the concern.
The stuff you said reminded me of something a few youth workers have said, and maybe they're a bit, sensationalist when they say that, they actually question will there be a future Muslim community in the UK? With this slow kind of secularization, as you mentioned it, or the lack of a significant, at least in your perception, a significant new generation to pass the torch on to in terms of Islamic activism and so forth, because they're so busy in their careers or education.
See, what I find is that when I talk to parents who do admit that their children don't seem to be overtly as religious as either they were or they wanted them to be, okay, so they're listening to music and doing other things. And actually, to be honest, I have been connected with people on Facebook, and what I find worrying sometimes is that youngsters are doing things which they are publicizing, where if I had done that, which I didn't, if I had done that, I probably wouldn't have advertised it. Okay, so now I find a reluctance in parents to sort of challenge that and say, well, what can we do? Okay,
kind of demand a higher moral standard of their kids.
I think part of the reason is because there is a breakdown in relationships, and I think that parents struggle with that. They don't feel that they should have challenged it earlier, and because they didn't, now it just exists as it does, right? So the problem actually isn't, we all make mistakes, we don't do things that we think, okay, I would have done it differently if I had another chance. Okay, that's fine, we're all human beings, yeah. But okay, now that that's happened, or it's happening, or there seems to be some, small consensus amongst the group of people that I know, for example, and I don't know if that extends to the whole Muslim community. But if that's the case, how are we going to stop that happening for future generations of Muslims? That's the bit that doesn't happen, okay? There's no concern there. It's like, okay, my child went off the rails, or my child is not there. Well, maybe that's just an acceptable way for things to happen now. Is it? Is it acceptable? Are you just saying that because actually it happened to you, and so that to normalize the situation so that maybe you don't seem as though you failed? And I say that hopefully with the greatest humility, not knowing what will happen with my children because they're too young, and I ask Allah Jalla wa Ala to protect all of our children.
Ameen, Ameen ya Rabbi.
Yeah, because we don't know, children of the Anbiya, okay, Nuh alayhi salam's son, for example, you don't know. You're not in control. You do the best that you can, okay? But can we accept at some point that if we see that things are going wrong, that we have to address that as a community, even if our children have gone past that moment?
I mean, you mentioned in your article a very powerful point that if somebody, for example, has the financial means and they're unhappy with the level of tarbiyyah in a particular institution of our community, then rather than try and fix and make the institution stronger, because they can afford it, they'll just take their kids out and try and protect their own kids with private kind of Islamic education or whatever, and not benefiting the community at large and letting. This
is essentially what I'm talking about. It's that a self-interest, okay, or a way of looking at the world where do I profit, okay? Where do I become gratified, okay? Rather than sort of saying, okay, well, I have a commitment to the Muslims around me as well. And that happens. We've all been through that, especially in middle-class Islam, okay, where we have the financial means. We can pay £10 an hour for a qari in Egypt who has, so many riwayat, and he studied under Sheikh Fulan and this and that and the other.
I know him.
But actually, you know him, yeah? Very good dude, mashallah. But actually, we sit down and we moan about the madrasa and we say the kids are getting a raw deal, but they're our children. They are also our children. As Islam, Islam behoves us. It tells us that actually we should care because they are the future of Islam. It's not
Even
as
if you protect your own kids,
yeah.
Who are they going to interact with tomorrow?
Who are they going to absolutely?
Who are they going to marry? Who are they going to deal with?
Yeah.
And work with and have businesses with and.
Yeah, but it's because we've lost sight of that. We've lost sight of.
So, do you think that the questioning of the existence of a Muslim community in Britain in 5 generations' time is a sensationalist one, or do you think there's some kind of?
My feeling is, you see, it's difficult because people will say, I don't know on what basis, but they say there are a lot more practicing Muslims around now, okay? Or they say we have far greater representation in Parliament, or we've got so many more masajid, okay? But ultimately, while that may be true, okay, I think what we're missing is what philosophy or ideology or motivations are guiding those institutions, okay? Yeah. Because it's all very well sort of saying, okay, we built a masjid that is hardly ever frequented, okay, or just on the Jum'ah, or just for the purposes of saying, or having a madrasa, that we can tick off a box and say that we did this, because we're living our life, and Islam is just, yeah, we did that, okay, that's done, khalas, we've completed our obligation. So it's more about sort of saying, we're more interested in the text of the word rather than the spirit of the word, okay, yeah. And that's the problem. So do I think it's bleak? Do I think it's sensational? I think that there are concerns, definitely. I think it's looking more bleak for me. Certainly, that's the way that I feel, the way things are going. And I think that people are right to be concerned. That's what I feel, definitely.
Just as a point, I think, to conclude with, inshallah, Jazakumullah khair, Uthman. Working in the city, I find that a lot of people, they aspire to that. And now you're talking about the parents who want their children to go through that process, ultimately to have a good job. Even that's farcical and nonsensical. And people forget that our rizq is written by Allah Azza wa Jal. I've seen people who are phenomenally successful in the city who have not come through that career route. And I've seen people who have ticked all those boxes along the way, and subhanAllah, they haven't achieved anything in the career. And so we have to remember that Allah Azza wa Jal is Ar-Razaq. He is the one who's going to provide. And we have to make sure that we inculcate in our children the want and the desire to please Allah Azza wa Jal, and then the dunya will follow us. I can speak from my personal experience, having gone through that, not having achieved academically, being in situations where I don't have jobs, but Allah's provided. So I say to parents, inculcate that in your children, that He is the one who's going to provide for them. So I think that's a very important point, just to remind everyone. And the second point is also, look, when we look at our children, and we love our children, yeah, if they were to be hurt in any way, it would make our hearts bleed. And so I always say this to brothers, and sometimes when I'm giving khutbahs in the city, is that, look, if at the end of it, your child has got that degree, got that first, got all of those A stars, got that perfect job, got that perfect life with a perfect partner, earning that perfect salary, and they don't get into Jannah, what have they achieved? And what have we passed on to them? And I think that's very important for us to stay focused on these things, inshallah. It's not that you don't achieve in the dunya, but as you were saying, at what expense?
But actually, just on that point, what do we get from it as well? Because there is an Islamic self-interest for us as parents to know that our children will be sadaqatun jariyah, that they will carry on doing good actions that will benefit us when we're passed on. So the investment that we've made, will it pay off for us? That's the question. Or as a brother told me in the community, right? He had 2 sons who went Oxford and Cambridge, and he's an old man and he doesn't see them for Adam. So, it's a good point, serious point to end on.
Yeah. So, I think to end on a practical note, right? One of the models, as you know, from our mashayikh, that we kind of push on things like Sabil as a program, is that the kind of 7 spheres, 7 dimensions of Tarbiyyah, right? And this is something practical that people at home can kind of have as a checklist for things that they're focusing on for their students, because we've been criticizing a lot. So in terms of what do I want my kids to excel in or learn and so forth, number 1, their iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, trying to inculcate that. Number 2, their righteous actions, their worship. Number 3, their knowledge, and knowledge includes any knowledge, information which is beneficial, including their not just Islamic knowledge, but their school and qualifications and so forth. Their activism, da'wah, desire to enjoin the good and forbid what's evil. What is that for? Number 5 is their akhlaq, very important to nurture their akhlaq. Number 6 is the ability to be united and work together with all other types of Muslims. And finally, number 7, you should know this kind of stuff as well. I'll test you later, inshallah.
Yeah.
Number 7 is all other types of skills, so management skills, time management skills, life skills, how to iron a shirt, how to cook, clean and fend for themselves. So number 1, iman. Number 2, amal saleh, righteous actions. Number 3, knowledge. Number 4, da'wah, enjoining good, forbidding evil, activism and so forth. Number 5, akhlaq, good conduct, manners and so forth. Number 6, a unifying mindset, unity, consensus, inclination towards consensus and unity. And number 7,
get
all
married
other types
to
of
somebody.
skills. All other types of skills, management skills, time management, all that kind of stuff. So
good advice.
as a practical, it's not mine,
Awesome.
it's just a model of Tarbiyyah that we run with both Islam Tunisia and other organizations that follow a similar kind of roadmap for Tarbiyyah. So that's
a development model.
Yeah, a development model. So Jazakumullah khairan, everyone, for watching. If you made it this far into the podcast, and you guys are awesome. If you like the podcast, give it a like and a share. If you didn't, then don't say anything bad, because we have very fragile egos. We're also on iTunes, I think Spotify, Google Play, all that kind of stuff now. So give it 5 stars as well, if you will. Share it with people. Jazakumullah khair, Usman bhai, for joining us. Omar, you can do a little wireless salam.
Oh, we get it.
No,
yeah, we're going to go and eat now. So جزاكم خير سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وأستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Unscripted.